I met today's guest, how else these days but through Instagram, where my budding friendship with him came through a series of domino effects from this very podcast. Charlotte, North Carolina based Noah Williams is a marketer, videographer, and influencer with over 100,000 followers, and deservedly so given his taste in style, let alone his palate for watches, whiskey, and wine. We talk about small towns in North Carolina, feeling like an outsider, skateboarding, and how all of those things often lead to an interest in fashion. Noah tells the story of his early days growing his Instagram account and falling deeper and deeper into the world of watches. Now, Noah is one of several contributors to Crown and Caliber and in turn Hodinkee, and he's also a bourbon fan with a newfound interest in wine, so we chat about those avenues as well. And the conversation wouldn't be complete if we didn't share some automotive stories, and as a fellow GTI owner, we have fun with some car talk, including a dicey speeding ticket Noah acquired in Texas. I'm your host, Wesley Smith, and you're listening to the Standard H Podcast. But yeah, Mr. Noah Williams, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I believe you've heard the show before. So you're from North Carolina, right?
Yeah. So I believe it was one of the first Standard Age podcasts I listened to was Scott from Tabor. I can't remember his last name.
Newkirk.
Newkirk. Yeah. Scott from Tabor. And I remember, I don't know if it was him or Tabor that posted about it, but I saw someone post about it and I picked it up. And I've been a listener since then.
Yeah, Scott's the man. I love Scott. Such a sweetheart of a guy. Where in North Carolina are you from, though? I want to say Winston-Salem for some reason.
Yeah. So my dad worked for Caterpillar Equipment early on in heavy equipment sales. So we moved around a lot early on.
Okay.
But I've lived in North Carolina now for around, I want to say 15 years. Grew up in a very small town, like 5,000 population called Mocksville.
I know Mocksville.
Do you really? Okay.
Yeah.
You're one of like 10 people.
Yeah.
But yes, Winston, I would say I'm from Winston because that's like, not to say that it's a big town by any means, but it's a more notable town that a lot of people know about. But yeah, born and raised essentially for the majority of my childhood and all my teen years in Mocksville. And then I'm sure we'll get into it later, but essentially, didn't know what I wanted to do coming out of high school. And I went to community college, worked in some church production and different stuff like that, just because I loved cameras. I was a skateboarder all through high school. So I basically, the way all of this started was I broke my wrist. And, I was down for like 6 months from skating. So rather than just sitting at home, I picked up a camcorder and I started shooting my friends skating, which then transferred into, the first couple of years of college working in production for churches.
Yeah.
And then parlayed into kind of the menswear and fashion interest. And I started shooting that. And then at 20 years old, right out of community college, I moved to New York for an internship.
Oh, no kidding.
Very cool. Yeah. Never visited New York before, had no idea what I was getting myself into, but yeah, lived up there for 6 months, had an awesome time. So yeah.
Okay, so let's rewind though. Okay, first of all, what boards were you skating? Who's your brand?
I was into Baker.
Okay.
A little bit of Real because I felt Real always had a good concave. Baker, their boards were always a little bit pointy for me. Okay. But Andrew Reynolds growing up was just maybe not my favorite, but was one of my favorite skaters.
Same.
His frontside kick flips were just epic. I remember there was one day, I was always horrible at flip tricks, but I remember there was one day I could do frontside kick flips for like 3 or 4 days. And I thought it was the coolest thing. But yeah, Reynolds was always cool.
That's awesome. Were you into like the DVDs and all that stuff?
Yeah, and I actually, now that, I work in marketing and a little bit of production, I'm always curious how they license the songs. I remember I had, it was an Almost video, an early on one, and I think his name was Daewon Song.
Daewon Song, yeah. Sure.
he had, it was like the Killers or somebody that was as his like part. And looking back now, I'm like, huh, so they were distributing and selling this. I mean, the licensing must have been astronomical if they did it the right way.
Right.
But yeah.
That's hilarious. So, what kind of clothing brands were you into? Now, I mean, obviously, you mentioned that you've been in kind of the fashion sector as well. But going back then, I mean, were you the fat shoe kind of DVS guy, or were you like more into like the skating and Vans?
Yeah, so I had a brief in the very beginning etnies phase,
Okay, yeah,
and then I very quickly realized, Ryan Sheckler, Life of Ryan, was very mainstream and not cool. So I got out of that. I was into TBS for a little while. I was into Fallen. Um, Lakai always had awesome stuff. I had a lot of pairs of Lakai. I touched on Nike SB for a little while. When the Stefan Janowski first came out, his
yeah,
shoe was all about it, loved it. But then I don't know. I'm a lover of small business and authentic brands, and Nike breaking into the skateboarding space was always a very controversial thing back then.
right,
This would have been 2012, 13, 14, whatever. And I remember I got them, and then I started to feel kind of weird because you're no longer supporting a cool skater owned and run brand like Fallen, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I would say Fallen, and then a little bit of Nike. But Lakai was always great. Eric Costin, guys at the Barracks were a favorite of mine. The Barracks was like the website in high school. I would always check at least once a day after school for their stuff.
Oh, that's sick. So, yeah, Costin's my favorite skater of all time, and my last pair of Lakais were his signature shoe. And then, so fast forward to like 2007, 8, and 9, those 3 summers I worked for the X Games. So I actually got to meet Andrew Reynolds and Eric Costin, and not to name drop, but it was just kind of like
Yeah.
I was like living inside of a DVD, like that movie, Yeah, Right, that they put out with like the green screen stuff. And like, oh my God, dude. Like I was just like, they say to never meet your heroes, but all those dudes were just awesome.
I think the biggest thing I love about your podcast and a couple other ones out there are, growing up in a small town, being interested in fashion and skateboarding and all that stuff. It seemed very outsidery because I was never super into team sports. I mean, I played baseball
Same.
right up until high school, and then it kind of started to get political, and it mattered who your dad was and all that kind of stuff with travel ball at least. But I remember feeling always kind of like an outsider because, once I got out of that, I was into skateboarding, and then I was into fashion and photography a little bit. And that wasn't the small town football kind of interest.
Right.
The cool thing I've really seen, especially through your podcast, is a lot of guys have that same kind of route where they're the outsider and they have this interest. It typically does start off in skateboarding where that creativity starts to come out, and then maybe you become interested in the clothing aspect of it or the board graphics, and then that will translate either into a fashion interest or a graphic design interest. And then same thing with production as well. I mean, becoming your group's kind of videographer, photographer, in my case, is what jump started me into my really my entire career as it stands at 26. I mean, it's still pretty early on, but and then that transition sort of into the metal and grunge phase. And I'm not anywhere near as big of a music guy as you are from hearing past podcasts, but that, and then transitioning into fashion and taking that same spark of creativity you had when you were a kid, and you were interested in what shoes you were skating or what deck you had, and the color of your trucks and the wheels and the bearings, that all translates pretty much instantly into the fashion world where you're looking at different swatches. You're looking at, how does this Cucinelli sweater jacket go with this Henley, go with, some pants. I mean, it's really interesting. And I think that's the fantastic thing about the internet in general is the kids who are sort of not the weird kid, but the, just the kid who's different than everybody else really sees, hey, there's actually a lot of other people like me.
Yeah.
and they all live in LA and New York. But you know, it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly direct parallels, but I think the main kind of the common trait is self-expression, right? So like that was the way that you were able to express yourself prior. I mean, your skateboard and your bicycle were like that was freedom, before you had a driver's license, and then
Yeah.
fashion as you get older is what you have for self-expression, and maybe some music too, like if you're a musician yourself. But yeah, it was all about the color of the wheels. And like even way back in the day, you could get different color grip tape for your deck, like
Right. I remember when
lime.
Shake Junt came out. Yeah, and they had the big graphic on there, and it was like the coolest thing.
Yeah, so I mean, I just think all of that is just so important to development and like and informing taste. Like we'll talk watches here momentarily, but like even just taste in watches and how that can evolve, and how like yeah, it's funny. I was this morning. I'm editing next week's podcast, so I was just like editing, and we were just talking about how the want list, so to speak, of the watches as you get more and more into watches can oftentimes grow, but then on the contrary, can oftentimes shrink because as your tastes evolve and refine themselves, then you're
Yeah.
you're you're kind of whittling out a lot of the other stuff that could otherwise be future mistakes,
Oh,
or like,
absolutely.
regret.
Expensive ones.
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. Um, so what music were you into as a kid then while you were skating and all that? What bands were you into?
Um, I was into Suicide Silence was always a good one. The Almost was always pretty cool for some lighter stuff. Skillet, a little bit of like Attack Attack. Um, Devil Wears Prada. Devil Wears Prada had some really great hits. And then, I was into rap a little bit. Really anything outside of country. Growing up, my mom thankfully forced me to play piano. So
Cool.
even that, I never took to it until I had already quit and like gotten older and realized that that's a very valuable skill. But really anything, especially now outside of country, and even country, I feel like is kind of making somewhat of a comeback right now.
Right.
But yeah.
Cool. So I guess usually one of the questions I ask is like, what was your first job? But it sounds like you worked for a church first. Is that right or no?
So my first job, and you can use any of this. I talk the same. I mean, there's nothing that I ever say that's controversial. But my first job was when I was 12 years old,
Okay.
and I was at this point already getting into skateboarding. And as you know, I mean, the shoes and the decks and everything just adds up over time. And I grew up, in a very comfortable middle class family, but it's an expensive hobby for a 12, 13-year-old to have. So I remember my dad, salesman, sales manager his whole life, a great salesman. He said, okay, if you want these things that are extra and on top, you're going to start mowing lawns. So I
Cool.
literally at 12 years old had a flyer made up with, our home phone and my name and everything. And I went door to door to a number of houses in our neighborhood and started, picking up clients. And I had three different people in the neighborhood who I did their lawns for them, actually for several years, and that translated into high school because you could either do that or you could work in the fast food industry, and I chose that because it was quicker and better money.
So were you charging by the hour? Is it per project? Like you're like, oh, well, that lawn's going to cost X, or is it just by the hour? What were you?
Oh yeah, well, because my dad was, in the sales industry, he taught me very quickly. Okay, this is what your time is worth per hour. So I think I started when I was 12 years old, and he would help me. He wasn't just like sending me out the door,
Right.
but I think I started off at like $25 an hour, and I remember thinking like, okay, I'm going to do this one yard. It'll take me 2 hours, and then I'll be able to buy, a blank deck or a shop deck or whatever it is. And that I was very grateful. From that age on, I really had an awesome metric for understanding your time is worth something. And the extra things you want, and now that's even translated into watches, the extra things you want that aren't, the clothes on your back that you have to have, and food, if you want nicer things, work for it, and find different side hustles and ways to.
That's crazy. He was, man, so he calculated $50,000 a year for a 12-year-old. Because that's what that amounts to.
It's not a bad place to start.
That's insane.
Yeah, but it was only a couple yards, so it was maybe
Right.
I don't know, $150, $200 a month. But I mean, still for 12, 13 years old, I was doing pretty good.
Yeah, I love just that extrapolation, like to just think of what could have been had you done it 40 hours a week and like make it 50 grand as a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
That's so funny, man. So you went to UNC Charlotte, right?
I did.
What'd you study there?
I actually went to school for what I do now. So I went to school for communications with a public relations focus. And essentially, I went about it very backwards. So I think college, for a lot of people, is great, but not for everybody.
Right.
So, when I got out of high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had started doing, photography a little bit freelance. I shot some weddings. That's how kind of what my job was while I was in high school. And I really had a passion for that, but it wasn't there yet. So I went to community college, Davidson Community College in Lexington, North Carolina. And while I was there, that's really when I started to get into menswear, because I was shooting these weddings and I noticed some guys just inherently looked better in suits than others. And I have a very obsessive personality. So once I get interested in a subject, whether that be skateboarding, photography, clothing, whatever, I go very deep. So I was just like, what makes this suit look better than this suit, and that and that. And I got very into menswear, and I started thrifting, going to Goodwill, vintage stores, and then eventually some department store stuff as well. But I started really only for my use, documenting my clothing arranged on the floor, just for my personal benefit, to remember, okay, this looked really good together. So I had started doing that, and I was about 17 years old, I want to say 17 or 18. Started posting that kind of stuff regularly, and the strangest thing happened. People took interest,
Right.
and started to follow. So I got even more into fashion, and I had, it was 1,000 followers, and then 2,000 followers, 3, 4, 5. And I remember once I got to around 5,000, I was like, oh, this is something. I should, go with this. And, growing up in a small town, fashion just wasn't really a thing. Not to say by any means that people weren't well dressed in my town, but the guys had their basic suits, and if they were in banking, they had the navy suit, the gray suit, and maybe some kind of pattern. But outside of that, it just didn't go a lot farther.
Right.
So I started to get this following on Instagram, and I decided, okay, I'm gonna run with it. Going back to when I was 12 years old and starting to pitch people on mowing their lawns, I thought to myself, why shouldn't I start to pitch people on including their stuff in my post? It's getting a couple hundred likes. Why not? And this was around the time that Daniel Wellington was really, really blowing up. I don't know if you remember them.
Yes.
But they were the fashion brand that kind of kickstarted, not to say kickstarted off an industry of fashion watch brands, but it really brought watches into that 17 to 25-year-old range, where it was easily accessible and a great thing. So I remember I reached out to them and I said, hey, doing this little thing, if you guys want to send me something or give me a discount, I'd love to get one. And I remember they sent me 2 watches.
Mm-hmm.
And at that moment it clicked. I can get not only products and work with companies that I enjoy, but I can get free stuff out of this. So my second campaign, I had reached out to Johnson & Murphy, because again, small town, Johnson & Murphy was like
the nice shoe. Yeah.
Yeah. If you went to Belk and Winston-Salem, they had the best stuff. And I reached out to them.
Good old Hanes Mall.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Absolutely. It's really gone downhill over the years, which is sad, but
well, once J.C. Penney, I mean, that was the anchor store right in the middle. It screwed up the whole mall.
Yeah, so I reached out to them and they referred me to this small boutique agency in New York called Battalion PR. And they sent me a pair of boots. And so again, it was that realization of, oh wow, not only will people send me free stuff, but they want to. Like there's a whole industry here. And growing up in Mocksville, Davie County, again, fashion wasn't really a thing, and PR wasn't really a thing.
Right.
So I knew I enjoyed marketing, but what the actual day to day looked like in a marketing agency and all that kind of stuff, I just had no idea. So fast forward, I worked with all of the brands that I'm very grateful to now, but would never work with again. So Daniel Wellington, Movement watches, a lot of really not great stuff, but I didn't know at the time. I was naive, I was new. And then I remember I got a Seiko SKX. What's the Pepsi one?
That's the one I have. I think it's the 009. Or
Okay,
it's
I
the
wasn't sure if it was.
007. I always get the two mixed up.
Yeah, there's like a 013 double O. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
so I got one of those. Yeah, and I got super into it, and then I actually reached out to I think it was Victorinox,
sure.
and they sent me a watch. And at the time, their stuff they were just really starting to get more into watches. They always had their basic,
Right.
field watches and stuff, but they started to send me stuff. So here I am. I'm 19 years old. I'm starting to get free clothing. I've got a couple thousand followers. And I remember I was going to graduate with my associates. So just the first 2 years of school. And I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. So that first PR agency I'd worked with, Battalion, I'd worked on a couple more campaigns for Johnson Murphy. And I remember I reached out to Angie, who was the account rep. And I said, Angie, what do you do? Like, explain your job to me. What do you do? You're in this cool New York office, you're sending out clothing, you're working with people like me. Explain that job to me.
Right.
And she explained it to me. And then 3 months later, I finished my associates and I moved to New York to work with them.
Where did you live in New York?
So I lived in Bushwick.
Oh, totally. Yep.
Yeah, and that's when it was starting to kind of come around, but it was still a little dangerous. This was like late 2015. But thankfully, I completely lucked out. So I'd finished school, I got in this internship, and I honestly had nowhere to live. So I'd already booked my ticket, and I was just like, I am going to figure this out. So I kid you not, 2 weeks before the internship started, I found this place on Airbnb in Bushwick. I wasn't really sure what the neighborhood was. The office was in Chelsea. And I was like, I'm just going to go for it. And I ended up being close enough to two different trains to where I think it was still like 40 minutes or so to get into Manhattan.
Sure.
But yeah, and that kicked everything off.
That's awesome. So, okay, so on the watch front, so when I guess Daniel Wellington led to Victorinox and Seiko and all those things, right?
Yeah.
So, was it really about the product being given to you at that point? Because I mean, they were not using you, but like you were the vehicle for outreach, right? Yeah. Now, were they paying you as well, or that the gift was the piece? So do you still have all these watches?
So the Daniel Wellington I actually gave to my dad back in the
Okay.
day.
Yeah.
And I have tried, I want to say three separate times now to gift him a better watch.
And he won't
And
take
I've given
it.
him Timexes, Seikos, like other cool stuff. And he has zero interest. He loves that Daniel Wellington because it's what his son got for free for this campaign.
Right, right,
But yeah, no, I wasn't smart enough at the time to know to ask for money too.
right. Okay.
But really, I started to get these watches and I wore them like all the time. So as I got more into the watch scene, it kind of opened up my mind a little bit. And when I moved to New York, Battalion, still around, still an awesome firm, kicking around. I'll do campaigns for them occasionally. The senior partner, Jim Kloiber, was a watch guy. So I remember he had, and again, this is 2016, so this is when watches were starting to pick up. But I remember he would wear, vintage subs and GMT Masters.
Right.
And I just looked and I would start talking with them about it. And at the time, they were actually the firm that helped Tudor sort of reintroduce the Black Bay line. I want to say that was 13 and
2013, I think. Yeah.
yeah. So as Tudor was starting to make a bigger push back into the US with watches like the Pelagos and the Chrono, they were doing all the PR for them. So I remember we had all these watches coming in. We had, ironically, I do think I met Ben Clymer one time because we had Hodinkee coming in the office and I like knew what they were, but I just didn't know much about them. So we had them coming in, Young Hans, they did stuff for them, and then the Richemont brand. So yeah, that doing press for them. Piaget, I've been to the Piaget boutique more times than I can count, right next to Central Park. That really sort of opened my eyes to the next level, which is what sort of pushed me in the direction that I'm in today.
So what was like the first nice watch? I use that in quotes, like mechanical watch that you got.
Yeah, so this is a very touching and interesting story, but I was listening to the podcast you did a little while ago with Josh from Washingista,
Yeah,
and he
sure.
mentioned Carter, and Carter went by I still don't know, like basically Risty was this very cool account where you never knew who he was or what he worked for, but he was in the watch industry. And now that he's unfortunately deceased, and very very rough thing, but he worked for, I'm pretty sure I can say it, Maurice Lacroix. So he worked for Maurice Lacroix, and he had reached out. We had kind of talked back and forth a little bit. I'd followed him, just would always comment on his stories and just say, hey, it's so cool. And we kind of started talking, and he saw some of the photography I was doing and some of the potential, and actually gave me my first campaign for Maurice Lacroix. And again, rather than asking for money because I was a watch lover,
Right.
I wanted a Maurice Lacroix. I wanted, I had this awesome, case that they had sent me of watches, and I was like, I want one. So this was around the time they had introduced the Icon, which is sort of their Gerald Genta inspired alternative, at a much, much more reasonable price point than something like an AP.
Sure.
So he gifted me that for shooting the campaign. And then that really kickstarted me off.
Cool. Well, you're a fellow First Omega in space owner. What's been your experience with that? So, I mean, I have that watch as well. Why did you get that as opposed to just the typical moon watch?
Absolutely. So, working in the, I guess, influencer space and now the watch space a little bit as well in my freelance work, I have a lot of watches come to me that people either need help selling or they're looking to sell or want to know what it's worth. And I have a buddy, Paul, who's a local photographer as well, who is also a watch guy. He's got several great pieces, and he brought that to me. He said, hey, Noah, I'm looking to sell it. And this was last year in 2020 when the pandemic was still happening. So, everybody was locked away at home, and I wasn't wearing my clothing. I wasn't traveling. So I had some extra cash. So I really went on a run of picking up several different pieces, but that watch came to me, and I was interested in a Speedy. And I said, well, how much do you want for it? And he, quoted me a pretty good price. And then I said, well, what would you sell it to me for? And he quoted me an even better price. And I said, I'll be over in an hour.
You're like, I have a buyer.
Yeah, I was like, I have the buyer. The buyer's me, funny enough. And I'll take it off your hands. And, the thing I really love about watches is, as you learn a little bit more and meet other collectors, it's really a great hobby to where you can get into it and either break even or make a little bit of money. So, the watch came to me for a great price. I bought it with the intention of owning it for a couple of months. I've now owned it for, I don't know, 8 or 9 months. Absolutely love it. And I remember when I put it on, I've seen anything mainstream I've probably seen or had on loan from either Crown and Caliber, or my local AD that I've shot stuff for. And I remember I had previous professionals before that came in, and I wear them, and I always thought it was cool, but there was just something off about it. I guess just not having a bracelet that tapered, not having the quick adjust. And when I put the first Omega in space on my wrist, that slightly shaved down case, the beautiful taper of that OEM Omega leather strap. It just hit. And I was like, this is my watch. This is the one that I want. And it's something I hope to hang on to for a long time. But a very cool watch. The only annoying thing with that, and I've heard you talk about it before, you're able to fit the 20 millimeter straps onto it. I have not been. So I've had to go and I bought, I don't know, half a dozen different NATOs for it at 19 millimeters.
Sure.
But other than that, it's been an awesome watch.
It's funny. Yesterday, I just got in a 19 millimeter gray NATO for that watch because I realized when I was doing some organizing several days ago, I realized that I didn't own a gray NATO, which is like, what? Like, how do I not have a gray NATO? And
absolutely.
Yeah, so it was just kind of interesting. I tell you, for the first Omega in space for me, it was just all about those alpha hands, that CK29985 and the straight lugs, and then I loved it. The handset just completely sets the watch apart, and then obviously the case size, as you mentioned, being a touch smaller. So, what is the relationship you have with Crown and Caliber?
Yeah, so that's a question I get quite a lot. I believe in anything, whether it's business or influencer collaborations, the most organic relationships last the longest.
Right.
So I had gotten back from New York. I'd finished school. It was 2 years later. I had a couple of nice watches, but I didn't have anything crazy. And I sort of went back to that mentality of, I should start reaching out to people again. I'm really interested in watches. I want to grow my collection. I want to learn more. Let me start to reach out to places. So I shot Crown and Caliber a direct message.
Cool.
And this is how simple it is. People think it's very complicated. It's not complicated at all. I shot them a direct message, and I had some good work. So I have Windsor Jewelers here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Ben, one of the owners, is a very good friend of mine. He, while I was still in college, had started to loan me watches to shoot, to post, to advertise the store. So I had this log of work between that and different campaigns I'd shot. So when I reached out to them, I had already shown an established proof of concept for, okay, this guy isn't, going to steal our watches and not great photos. So I reached out to them. They saw the work. We emailed back and forth a little bit, and I had an initial 3-month contract, just 1 month loans, no money, back and forth, nothing like that. And that was, I want to say, 2.5 years ago now, and we're still working together. I've written for their blog. I've been in a couple of their videos, and they've just been the best partner. Like with anything, I have a day job that, pays very well and takes care of me. So I really like to work and collaborate with people that I'm passionate about. I believe what they're doing. And, a lot of guys are now getting into watches, and they either don't know where to go. They don't have a great relationship with their authorized dealer. And, Crown and Caliber, I've worked with them. The majority of the work, I would say at least 90%, is completely unpaid. So it's a win-win for both of us, where I get to experience great watches, and then I'll shoot some great photos for them. They'll use them. They won't use them, whatever.
That's cool.
But they have been really, really cool. I actually went to their office in Atlanta and met all their marketing team and saw their studio and different stuff like that. And it's a very cool operation. And I feel like, I've heard in other podcasts where people talk about eBay watches and, there's authentication now and all that kind of stuff. But there's just something really refreshingly simple about this site. Has watches you can trust. They have a broad variety. They're fair market prices. I mean, with stuff like Rolex and AP, if it's gray market or secondary market, it's going to be above retail right now.
Sure.
That's what market price is.
Right.
But, they have a very, very cool setup with in-house watchmakers. So it's something I've bought watches at 0 discount from them on personal money. So they're a very cool company. I love what they're doing.
If you haven't heard episode 1 of the Standard Age podcast, then let me tell you about my friend Tim Jackson. As owner of Passion Fine Jewelry, Tim and his team specialize in fine jewelry, as well as some of the finest independent watch brands available. I'm talking about Groenfeld, Habring, Kudoki, Roger Smith, Roman Gauthier, Sarpaneva, the list goes on. The staff at Passion Fine Jewelry is literally made up of friends and family, so you will feel right at home if and when you visit. If California is out of reach, you can absolutely email or call the shop and they'll get you sorted. Visit passionfinejewelry.com for more information. As you all know, I'm a huge fan of using the right product for the right job, and like many of you, I appreciate products with a story. That's why I drive a Volkswagen GTI. It's a hot hatch with heritage. It's also why I'm into specific watches like my Tudor Black Bay. And that's exactly why I'm a fan of the indie accessory brand Cantonment. Cantonment makes a utilitarian cloth they simply call a kerchief. It's smaller than a standard bandana, but larger than a handkerchief, which makes it ideal to tuck in a back pocket or use as a neckerchief. I always take one on a bike ride or have one with me as a backup face covering. Not only do these kerchiefs satisfy several functions, but they look great too. Each set features illustrations celebrating icons of product design like the Omega Speedmaster, the Fender Stratocaster, or my favorite of course, a classic GTI. Follow them on Instagram at Cantonment Co. That's CantonmentCo, or visit them at cantonment.co. And use the code STANDARDH in all caps, no spaces, for 20% off of absolutely everything in their online shop. Now let's get back to the show. Have you seen any differences since Crown and Caliber's been acquired by Hodinkee?
Yeah, so that was an interesting one. So the day they did the announcement, I was filming something for my day job. We were in the studio. And I looked down and I had a text from Mark, my guy there. And it was long. And I was like, oh gosh, like maybe they're like not doing this anymore. Maybe I'm going out of business. I don't know. COVID was a crazy time. And I look and he said, hey, just to let you know, we were just acquired by Hodinkee. Nothing changes on our part. We're still doing, all of our own stuff. The only thing I noticed was the person. So I wrote for their blog mid 2019 to like early pandemic, so like March. The editor at the time was freelancer, and she transitioned into Hodinkee now to be their shop writer. But other than that, no, it's been completely business as normal for them with my communications and how they're doing everything. I mean, I'm sure with time there could be some changes that happen, but everything is same old for now.
Yeah, sweet. That's great to hear. What's been the most recent watch you've gotten recently?
Most recent watch has been actually one that today's the first time I've taken it off. The 42 millimeter black dial Sky Dweller.
Okay.
Stainless steel. Very cool watch. When summer rolls around, I love a little bit bigger, kind of chunkier watch.
Sure.
So that watch, I typically, because I work from home and I have most of my watches here, we'll change out a watch 1 or 2 times a day just because I'm bored. But with that watch, that's something I've had on my wrist for 2 weeks. Today I'm wearing a very cool watch. This is my Nomos Club Campus, the Neomatic. This is actually one of 35 that was made for the Carolina Watch Club. So it's very, very cool. But as a North Carolina guy, you'll appreciate this. No way you're going to see it on here, but it says Carolina Watch Club at 6 o'clock.
Oh, cool.
And then it has the North Carolina, South Carolina outlines on the crown. And then on the back, it has the numbering and then says made for Carolina Watch Club.
That's amazing. And a see-through case back.
Oh yeah. So this watch, it's a shame. I wear it probably once every couple of months. But I take it out at least once a week. We're in the middle of Uptown, so there's a lot of stuff outside. I take it out at least once a week because the case back, just the finishing of the movement is it's incredible. You can get obviously a blue dial Club Campus, no problem, but the sub dial is white with a red sub-seconds hand,
right?
Which is the only way that you can get it. Is well, there's only 35, and they've done other collaborations. I know. I feel like with other watch clubs, I think there's one out of San Diego that they did as well.
Oh, cool.
Very cool watch.
Yeah, amazing. Well, regarding the size, you mentioned you like to go for like a chunkier watch in the summer. Is that because you're not wearing a lot of long sleeves, so it doesn't need to fit under a cuff?
Yeah, and I think there's just something inherently that feels a bit sportier about a large watch.
Totally.
Panerai is definitely on my short list of things I want to own. I love really the 42 millimeter watches more than the 44. But there's just something, it just feels more robust. It feels like, we're only about 20, 25 minutes from the lake and then 3 hours from the coast. So, if I'm going out to the coast for the weekend or hitting the boat out on the lake, it's just something that feels robust and like you can do anything with it.
Yeah, I kind of feel like if you're going Panerai, you just have to get a 44 millimeter because that is Panerai. You know what I mean? I
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I love my buddy John who's got it's like I don't know if it's DLC or PVD, but it's all the blacked out and then it's got the
That's the
California
crazy
dial.
California one, isn't it?
I was gonna say that would be my pick, like if I were to go Panerai.
John is a very cool guy. I've never met him in person, and I understand that you grew up with him.
Yeah,
But I remember like mid 2020, and this is the reason I love Instagram and social media.
yeah.
We had followed each other for a while, and he just started posting more watches, and we started talking. So, I mean, we talk once or twice a week back and forth on Instagram now.
Oh, funny.
Post COVID, I'm going to head up there and we're going to do something. But very cool watch guy, GTI guy as well, watch guy,
Yeah,
clothing guy. I mean, it all goes together.
yeah, yeah. He and I could talk for. I literally talk to him every single day, like every single day on text. Like he's one of my best friends. So um,
Insane
he
collection.
he's also unlike anybody else I know, and like he is a quirky cat, and like I love him for it. It's the best. What mistakes have you made, or can you point to any mistakes you've made along your watch journey?
In the watch journey. So I think, and again, I'm grateful for every opportunity that I've gotten. But the posting and peddling of Daniel Wellington and
Oh well,
has never stood well with me once I kind of understood what I was doing. When it comes down to it, and again, very grateful they sort of gave me my start in many ways. But when it comes down to it, I probably sold a lot more of those watches than I would even want to know. Thinking that they were great quality, but now I know, anybody can go on Alibaba and essentially
right.
get 200 of them for, I don't know, a couple $100 and then mark them up to whatever you want. That was something I regret a lot. I mean, the bigger watch sort of phase. So again, before I got into serious watches, but like just overly gaudy, large watches were something that I regret. Different big Bulivas and Nixon. So when I came out of my skateboarding days, I still thought Nixon was cool. So I had a big gold Nixon that I thought was awesome.
Was it the player?
It was no, it was the Century SS.
Okay, because the player I think came in gold. You're into bourbon and whiskey, I know.
Yes,
What are you, a rocks guy or are you an old fashioned? You mixing it or you a straight bourbon guy?
I am an equal opportunity drinker. So when it comes to really anything but bourbon, whiskey, I'm not as into Scotch as I used to be. When I got into it, I was really into like the Macallans and the Lagavulins, but I've moved into more of the whiskey and bourbon kind of areas. It just depends on what it is. If it's something really nice like a Yellowstone, gosh, my mind's going blank, or something nicer. Basically, if it's above $50, I will do it a lot of the time, just neat by itself. But Basil Hayden makes a really nice dark rye that I'll make a Manhattan out of. And then old fashions, absolutely.
Sure.
But yeah, it just depends kind of what the vibe is and what we're drinking.
You know, it's funny. I'm usually a bourbon over a rye person, but two consecutive birthdays, a good buddy of mine, Nate, he gifted me the bourbon one year, and then the following birthday, he gifted me the rye. Little did I know that the Angel's Envy rye is like maple syrup, man. It is so sweet and so delicious that it just kind of counterintuitive, honestly, because I find most ryes are not that sweet. Um, that's amazing. So I guess you use different bourbons for what you're drinking, right? Like if you're going to drink it neat, you probably drink something different than if you're making an old fashioned.
Yeah, yeah. So if I'm doing an old fashioned, technically an old fashioned is supposed to be made with a rye as well.
Right,
So I'll
right.
do not the darker Basil Hayden, but even Legent. I don't know if you ever heard of them.
I haven't.
I did a campaign with them over the holidays for 2020, and they sent me some stuff. Mitchers is another awesome one.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a fan of Billions at all, but that is what Bobby Axelrod drinks in Billions. You know, people right now, similar to the watch world, are really into the high end, the Blantons and all that kind of stuff. That's really only a $75 bottle, but they're charging $200-300 for it. But you can really do a lot if you have quality ingredients and quality bitters and fruit and different stuff you're putting in there. I guess aren't just specifically for old fashions. You know, a bottle of Makers is awesome.
Yeah.
Are really, really nice bottles you can get for well under $50. Yellowstone is one that's awesome. Four Roses. You really don't have to go into the deep end if you don't want.
Yeah. What are you into wine?
Getting there. So if you people who will follow my personal Instagram, you know, stuff like Stag's Leap, I'm starting to get into. I'm very, very cautiously getting into wine because, like I kind of said, with washes and bourbon and even cars a little bit, I get obsessed over these things.
Right.
And, you know, a $50-$60 bottle of bourbon is somewhat expensive at face value. But compared to a $50 or $60 bottle of wine, that's like the next sort of echelon, I feel like. So I'm trying to cautiously work my way in. But yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Are you finding that you've kind of acquired a taste for a specific varietal specifically?
Yeah, so the lighter reds, so the Artemis specifically from Stag's Leap is a really, really nice light red that has enough body where you can have it with heavier foods, but also if you're just casually sipping, having some pizza or watching a movie, that's been good. But really the nicer red blends, I think growing up, I just didn't hear a lot about red blends. It was always cabs and Pinot Noirs. But red blends are coming a long way. If you find a vineyard that you really enjoy, a lot of time their winemaker will have done some sort of a red blend. That's wonderful, and it's a nice mixture. So it's been good.
Yeah, I don't know if in North Carolina you'll even have access to it, but I just spent some time up in like the Ojai, Santa Barbara area a couple weeks ago, and just in the local liquor store, it's just like Ojai Winery, I guess is what it's called. So it's
Okay.
not rudimentary, but like it's very just a very straightforward red blend that they'll just call their table wine. Now they do specific varietals, Pinot Noir, etc., but this red blend was like $25 a bottle, which is still like not the cheapest thing on the planet, but I'm telling you, it was delicious, man. So like if you can find it, and I'll text you a photo of the bottle later. Um, but it's delicious stuff, man, and it's only like $25 a bottle. So it's well worth it.
And you know, not to keep drawing comparisons back to watches, but
No, that's all right.
you know, you sort of have your Timexes, which are great value, you know, wonderful. Your Seiko fives, which are like your entry level to you know, mechanical pieces, and then you sort of have you know, Nomos, Grand Seiko, that kind of stuff, which is in the
Yeah.
1,000 to 3,000, $4,000 range, and then you have Rolex and up from there. Wine is really the same way. So I remember when I graduated college and I wasn't drinking Trader Joe's $2 wine anymore. You know, companies like 19 Crimes that make bottles between 10 and $15. That was sort of a aha moment where I went, oh, well, I really like this. That's
Yeah.
sort of your Seiko SKX. And then as you get into those $20 to $25 bottles, that's the next thing where you can get a lot of great value and you can notice a remarkable taste. And then similarly from 30 jumping up to 50 to $75 a bottle, it's again that sort of realization of, oh, okay, this is the next level and I can really see value here.
Yeah.
I'm not to the point where I can go over $100 for a bottle, but Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, um, I don't know. You have to be really into it to get into that level.
Yeah. Have you dipped your toe into the pool of Orin Swift?
I haven't.
Okay, so Orin Swift several years ago, like within the last 10 years, they like blew up because they had this bottle of wine or this red blend called The Prisoner. And then they do these really avant-garde, artistic and kind of edgy labels as well. So like if you're going to judge a book by its cover, there's some of the cooler looking bottles, I'll say. But they've got stuff from like $22 to over $100 a bottle. So the Prisoner, when I started drinking it, was like $37, and I've seen it now as high as 70. Not normal, but it's about $55 a bottle now, I guess. 48 to 55. It's delicious stuff. I mean, it's really good. They did another wine called Machete, as in like
Okay.
the long knife slash short sword, I guess. Uh, yeah, Machete's awesome. Um, and then they have other ones like one's called Papillon, which is like
I
it's
have
got
seen that.
the knuckles.
I've
Yeah,
got a local kind of bodega bottle shop thing a couple blocks from me here, and I have seen that and wanted to try it out.
yeah. So that's Orin Swift, and they've since sold the Prisoner label, so they actually don't own that label anymore. But they still make all those other wines that are really really good. So if you like blends, they pretty much specify in red blends, which are great. So I would check those out.
Yeah,
You're a GTI guy. What was your first car?
I am. So my first car was a car I wish I had never sold. 1987 Volvo 240 DL.
Amazing.
And the fun story behind that is it was the exact car I was brought home from the hospital in.
No kidding. That's awesome.
Born in 1985 or 1995 rather. And my mom was a nurse at the time, just wanted a really great, reliable car. So she bought the car brand new in 1987, brought me home from the hospital in it. And then, that generation of Volvos, like the very boxy, just tank,
Totally.
they last forever. So when I turned, I guess it was 16, we still had it, and it was still like a family car that was kicking around. And I remember, and I shudder now looking back, I was so embarrassed of that car because I was the only one of my friends that didn't get a cool new Kia or a cool new Honda. And I had this mint condition, beautiful interior, great exterior paint, blue Volvo. And I didn't see it at the time, didn't see it at all. But I thought that was the coolest car. And then, of course, after I guess a year and a half of daily driving it, it wasn't fit to be a daily driver. It started having a lot of problems, and
Sure.
just costing thousands in repairs and maintenance. So got rid of that. Got into a Ford Fusion. Um, it was an okay car. I was in college, so whatever. It was nice enough. It had Bluetooth audio, and I could do that.
That's a North Carolina car if there ever was one.
Oh, absolutely. And again, that was something. I mean, coming from an '87 Volvo, that was kind of incredible to me. And it had a V6. I think it was only like 250 horsepower, 260 horsepower, whatever it was.
But it's also sort of like the anti-Accord as well.
Oh yeah, well, I looked at Accords and I wanted to be different, so I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm gonna go get this other thing. And then, ironically, while I was still in college, I had just paid off that car and I totaled it.
Oh no.
Not a bad story at all, a ridiculous one and a learning lesson. But there was a girl who literally, I was leaving UNC Charlotte. It was rush hour. And I had actually gone back to school, which is the thing that always kills me. I went back to school because I was such a nerd. I had to know what my grade was on a test a day early. So I went back for this extra thing. I got to see that, and I was leaving, and she was dead stopped in the middle of a 45-mile-an-hour road, texting, looking down, and I had a car or two cars in front of me. What was it? Yeah, it was like two cars, and they both swerved. And by the time I saw her, I was going 50, going 5 over, couldn't do anything, slammed on the brakes, and just slammed into the back of her. And you made the Honda comment. It's funny. I now have a vendetta against early to mid 2000 Honda Civics because underneath that bumper is just a metal rod. And I hit that, just destroyed the front end of the car. I was perfectly fine. I walked away with really no injuries. But after that is when I could finally indulge in my car guy fantasies. And a sign you have an obsession with something is when a normal person gets in a car wreck and totals a car they just paid off, they would think, oh no, this is horrible. My first thought was, oh wow, I can go car shopping now and I can buy something cooler. Because I was making a little bit more money in school and I was like, this is my chance. So I took the insurance money and I bought a 2010, and this was in 2017, 2016. I bought a 2010 BMW 328 Xi, the E92, the coupe, the most base, stripped down model, but I had a BMW coupe and an E92. The E92 M3 is still one of my favorite cars, a naturally aspirated V8. No way I could afford one of those. So I bought this, I think it only had like 40 something thousand miles on it, car, but I owned it for 2 years. I did a muffler delete, blacked out the lights, and took a decent car and made it kind of ghetto, as my mom likes to say. But that was sort of the first thing where I was like, okay, I finally get a cool car. I love that. And then after that, because when you own a higher mileage BMW, they're cheap for a reason.
Right.
Depreciate for a reason. I started, I think, like a year and a half, 2 years in, having a lot of maintenance issues. So I sold that for what I have now, which is my 2017 GTI. And during school, I had interned doing PR for Keffer Automotive, which is like a dealer group. And I had been based out of their Volkswagen dealer. So I had driven every trim, every spec of actually basically all 2017, 2018 models. So I knew I wanted a leather interior. I knew I wanted the upgraded lighting. I wanted, I'm not as much of a purist as you, so I don't have a 6-speed. I have a DSG.
Sure.
But I knew I wanted CarPlay and all that kind of stuff. So I was calling around to different dealers, and this car had just come in. It only had 6,000 miles. It was white. It had the leather interior, CarPlay, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I picked that up, and I've loved it ever since.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge advocate, as you well know. And I haven't found a color that I really don't like, but what I do like is the white GTI is awesome. And like the red accents pop so much more. Like I have the carbon steel gray, I think it's called. The red it's there, but you definitely notice it on the white. It's super sharp.
Absolutely. Ironically, I just picked it up on Friday from a shop you'll know, DAP. So Deutsche
Yep.
Auto Parts, the guys down in Cornelius.
Sure.
They were doing some routine, like the DSG service and all that stuff for fluids. And, I told them, I said, while you guys have it, why don't you go ahead and let's do a Stage 1 Plus Unitronic tune and let's do some spacers because they're already lowered. It's on an Eibach Pro lowering kit. So I wanted to just bring those tires out a little bit. And then the tune is something I've wanted to do forever. I think you said you had the APR, but Unitronic, I mean, it's 100 extra horsepower, around 100 extra torque. So it was a no-brainer.
Yeah, it's a completely different driving experience, I feel like. And honestly, now dealers are doing the APR Stage 1 in-house. Like you can get a dealer to do it for you, which is only just, verification that it's
Yeah.
no disrespect to the engine, really. It's just kind of suited for it.
That speaks volumes. It's no secret Volkswagen has had their issues with Dieselgate and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But it speaks volumes to the brand that you can put 100 extra horsepower onto this 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo, and it can take it. And not only can it take it, but if you get it installed at a dealer, it doesn't void your warranty.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a testament to that car. But yeah, I love it. It's lowered. It's got a roof rack. I have a muffler and a resonator delete. So it's a little obnoxious, but it's fun. It's just a rowdy little car.
Well, that's cool. So you did an interesting trip with Gerard Perigo.
Yeah, yeah. So
Let's
tying back to the internship I had in New York, fast forward 2 years later, I'd left battalion. I was back in school, actually just graduating. And Jim, the guy who ironically kind of got me into watches early on, reached out and he said, "Hey, we got this campaign for Gerard Perregaux, and they want to do an all-American road trip." I think around the time I might have had 100,000 followers, but I wasn't like huge. I only have like 134 now. So he reached out and he was like, "Hey, we can't really pay you a lot, but we'll give you a budget of, I think it was $5,000, and use whatever you want, but we want you to go cross country." And I said, "Sure." So I had literally just started a job at, I kid you not, it was a craft beer production startup, which was a very cool year after college. But I had
yeah.
just started this job, and I told them, "Okay, look, I know you don't know me very well, but I need 11 days off in the middle of this job." And thankfully, because it was a startup culture gives you unlimited PTO, which is sort of a farce, but we won't even get into that.
No, I'm familiar. I'm very familiar.
Yeah, so I'm a little jaded, you can tell. I drove from where I'm at in Charlotte down to Charleston, touched the water there, and then proceeded in 5 days to drive from there to Palm Springs, and then from Palm Springs into Los Angeles, and then from Los Angeles down to San Diego.
Amazing.
And I did the whole trip in, I want to say, 11 days.
Yeah.
And I might have even made it a little bit quicker to Palm Springs. But that was around the time I think Gerard Perregaux is. It's unfortunately, it's just not as big of a watch company in the mainstream as it should be. You see companies like Patek and AP right now with those Gerald Genta inspired designs and the Nautilus and the Royal Oak. And Gerard Perregaux has a very rich watchmaking history in their pieces.
Totally.
So the entire campaign was based around the Laureatos. They sent a stainless steel chronograph on a leather strap, and then a DLC coated, I'm not sure if it was DLC or solid ceramic, all black on the rubber strap. And then they sent basically the same thing for my girlfriend as well. So we rented a Mustang, and it was just an EcoBoost, but EcoBoost convertible. We drove that cross country, and that was when actually I got my no, that was my first speeding ticket. I don't know if you're familiar with the Prada Marfa art installation in Texas.
Yeah, of course.
So that's really in the middle of nowhere. Like what you see in the photo is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Marfa, Texas is, I want to say, probably 45 minutes away. And then it's 3 or 4 hours away from Dallas. So we had driven down this 2-lane road for at least an hour and a half to 2 hours to get there off of the highway. And then it was another 45 minutes to the next town. So being a 22, 23, whatever I was, year old guy, you have a rental Mustang and you have approximately 2 hours of 2-lane road, 75-mile-an-hour bliss. And when you're out in the desert and you're on a road like that, just dead straight, 75 seems a little slow, and then so does 85 and 95 and 105. And so I was cruising at, I kid you not, 120 miles an hour for like, I've already paid the ticket off and everything, so it's fine. I can talk about it. But cruising at that speed for quite some time, and it's just a straight shot. And the Ford Mustang, even though it was an EcoBoost, is very smooth and quiet at that speed. And we had just finished shooting at the Marfa store. We had gone to actual Marfa, Texas, had lunch, and we're headed back. And I see some cars. You can see for 5 miles out there. It's just nothing but line of sight. And I see 2 cars coming up on me, and I'm going about, 110. And I think to myself, Noah, you should probably slow down. So I had just let off the gas when they were probably a mile or so away. And instantly, radar detector went off, KA band. And thankfully, I had enough wind resistance where it got me down to around 93.
Yeah.
But I got my first speeding ticket in the middle of the desert going 93 miles an hour. And the officer, thankfully, was incredibly nice because I had a white Mustang with Florida plates that was marked as a rental, and I'm in the middle of nowhere. So, I mean, your mind automatically goes to some sort of drug trafficking or human trafficking. And, it's me and my wonderful blonde girlfriend, both dressed up. I'm wearing like white pants and like a Brooks Brothers polo and a nice watch. And, he comes up and he has his hand, he doesn't draw his gun, but he has his hand on his gun. And he's sort of, touching it and looking around. He says, "Sir, I need you to get out of the car, please." And, has me do the whole thing of, putting my hands down, and rightfully so. I put no fault at him. He didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Because you have to keep in mind, I mean, it's a weird time. You're in the middle of the desert. So, asked me if I had any weapons on me. I looked through the car a little bit because the window was down. And then has me go and stand, a couple feet away, and then is questioning my girlfriend, asking the same questions just to make sure I wasn't like kidnapping her or something.
Right.
And then ask, what the hell are you doing out here in the middle of nowhere? And we explained, oh, we're shooting a watch thing. And then ironically, I showed him all the photos and we actually shot some stuff with them. But I had hoped from the camaraderie it would get me out of the ticket,
right.
But it did not. So it was a ticket. I paid, but thankfully, Texas tickets don't apply or transfer over to North Carolina. So I very stupidly paid the ticket, which if you're listening, you should never do. Always contest it. Always have a lawyer look at it. But it was my first ticket, so I was like, oh, I'll just pay it. It's like $250. But yeah, thankfully, I think in North Carolina, if that happened, I would have gone to jail because like 80 miles an hour is reckless. So
yeah,
the story of my Gerard Perico Laureato campaign and my first speeding ticket.
That's crazy. That's so crazy. Well, just wrapping up here. What's a Grail watch and a Grail car? What's on the list?
A Grail watch and a Grail car. That's a great question. So I think that probably changes on a monthly basis. But if I had to say right now, gosh, that's a hard one. I mean, for the car, I'm really into the Porsche stuff right now, as anyone who follows my Instagram will see. I mean, I regularly repost, 991s, 993s, the mid to late kind of 80s. I think those are the G bodies, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Those are quite cool. I see a lot of those actually around Charlotte. So something like that, I think would be wonderful, and a nice, either a clean minimalist white or fun yellow or red, like a Guards red. I don't know if that's what the color was called back then. Would be great. And then for the watch, Grail watch. I mean, some sort of, I think Vacheron. Vacheron's going to be on the come up pretty soon. So, an overseas perpetual in rose gold with a blue dial would be really cool. And those are watches that, by no means are affordable, but relative to the Rolex and AP and Patek market are a great buy right now. I mean, a sport watch with a perpetual calendar complication is just incredible. And I think those are at around 100,000. The Richard Mille stuff I think is very cool, but I have a hard time understanding the longevity with that brand. I think when you look at the early to mid 2000s, Franck Muller was in a very similar position where it was like the watch to have and the cool thing to have. And they're not bad watches now, but I don't think most people would gravitate towards those. So yeah, I guess that's kind of what I go. And then I think, if we wanted to go more modern, a 991 GT3 RS, like a Guards red or Miami blue. And then I think, a Platinum Daytona would be a very, very cool setup.
Yeah, totally. And I'm behind all the way the Vacheron. I don't think anybody does a blue dial better than Vacheron, in my opinion.
No, not at all. And that's a brand, when you're talking about, a lot of people complain about the market being a little bit inflated right now. And, I agree. I think a stainless steel sub at $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 is definitely more than I would personally pay. I understand value is relative, and places sell them like hotcakes. So there's clearly a market out there. But when you get into the more haute horology, you just can't find a lot of the Patek and a lot of the AP, and especially with AP having pulled a lot of their distribution, or almost all of it now, I believe, to in-house boutique only. For a guy that isn't spending millions of dollars a year, I think it's a little daunting, and it's a little disappointing. And I hope a lot of people will start to see the value in brands like Grand Seiko, Nomos. I mean, there's incredible value and incredible story. I recently picked up one of the 9F quartz movement Grand Seikos, the all gray. I'm horrible with reference numbers, but it's like the SBGV245 or something.
Yeah, I'm terrible with them as well.
Yeah, it's the gray quartz sport watch that they make. It's accurate to 15 seconds a year. The average quartz watch is accurate to around 15 seconds a month. And Grand Seiko goes as far as to grow their own quartz crystals in-house and then hand select the crystal to go to the watch. So, at that point, you're really not talking about a run-of-the-mill quartz watch anymore. You're talking about something that is beautifully crafted and finished. It's finished inside. The case on an exterior level, obviously, there's Ratsu finishing, is bar none. But even the finishing of the movement inside the watch, that is a sealed case pack, you can't see the movement, is incredible. So I think brands like that will already have, but are going to continue to gain more value in the marketplace and in mainstream watch society.
Totally. Well, Noah, this has been a blast, man. I really appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything else you want to talk about, promote?
No, not at all. Thanks for having me on. I guess follow me on Instagram at Noah Williams Style for the style content that I produce, and then Noah Williams _PR for kind of more behind the scenes and watch content. But no, it's been a lot of fun talking.
Sweet. All right, man. Well, let's catch up soon, and potentially even over some whiskey or wine in Raleigh someday alongside John.
Absolutely. Sounds like a plan.
Okay, buddy. I'll chat to you soon.
That's good.
All right, thanks. Major thanks goes out to Noah once again, and thanks to all of you for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the show, and while you're there, if you don't mind rating and even leaving a short review, it helps way more than you think. Please give Standard H a follow on Instagram at standardh_, as well as the podcast page at standardh_podcast. Shout out to Jensen Reed and Super Beautiful for the theme track, as well as the clear audio for the noise canceling headphones. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Standard H podcast in 2 weeks' time. Thanks again for listening.